You won't see me again. I've found someone better. Your stuff is in storage. That was the entire message glowing on my phone screen at 11:18 p.m. on a Wednesday night. My name is Michael Carrington. I'm 52 years old, and at that moment I was standing in the kitchen of our Boston townhouse, staring at those words while the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. My wife, Laura, was supposed to be in Miami on a girls' trip. Instead, she had just ended 20 years of marriage in 2 blunt sentences. The text included a screenshot of a transfer, $92,500, pulled straight out of our joint savings into her personal account. 20 years together erased with one click. I set the phone on the counter, poured the rest of my cold coffee down the sink, and for the first time in decades, the house felt foreign, like I was standing in a stranger's kitchen. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. Weekend retreats that stretched into full weeks. New outfits that never appeared at home. Calls that stopped when I walked into the room. It's ironic because I'm a fraud examiner by trade. Spotting inconsistencies is literally my job. Yet in my own marriage, I turned a blind eye. Maybe that was the real betrayal, not hers but mine, ignoring the truth because I didn't want to face it. Laura always said my work was boring. It's just numbers and reports, Mike. Don't expect me to care about that. She'd laugh whenever I tried to explain a case. I told myself it didn't matter. As long as we had a good life, who cared if she didn't value what I did? We got married after barely a year of dating. I funded her boutique wellness studio out of my own savings, signed off on the new SUV she wanted, nodded along when she insisted we upgrade to a house in Beacon Hill. My father once warned me years ago while we were repairing a fence at his place in Vermont, "Son, be careful. Some people don't see the effort behind the money, they just see the spending." I shrugged it off then. But his words hit me like a hammer tonight. 6 years into the marriage, I started quietly protecting myself. Nothing shady, nothing illegal, just careful planning. I created 2 shell companies, opened a trust in my nephew's name, invested part of my income in overseas funds. Laura knew about the checking account and the joint savings. But that was only the surface. Beneath it, there was a structure designed to withstand exactly what had just happened. Still knowing it could happen and watching it unfold are 2 very different things. I stared at the wedding photo on the wall, one of the last traces of us in this house, and felt something harden inside me. Not rage, not despair, just a cold, quiet resolve. I picked up my phone and typed a 2-word reply. Good luck. Then I dialed my brother Ethan. You remember that safety plan we cooked up years ago, I asked. There was a pause on the other end, then a low exhale. Yeah, it's time. You're sure she made her move? Now it's mine. I ended the call, walked back to the table, and opened my laptop, the one Laura never knew existed. 3 notifications were waiting attempted password changes on accounts she didn't even know about. She had been thorough. I had to give her credit for that, but she was playing a game she didn't understand. That night I didn't sleep. I sketched out the first steps on a legal pad the same way I used to outline cases at the office. First, freeze every shared account. Second, flag her transfer as suspicious through my banking contacts. Third, send documentation to my attorney. By dawn, the plan was already in motion. The strange thing is, habits cling even when your life explodes. I brewed my morning coffee, toasted a bagel, sat at the table like always. Only this time, the silence wasn't comforting. It was proof of what I'd lost. I thought back to how we'd met at a university fundraiser. I was 32, recently divorced after a short, ill-fated first marriage. She was 29, lively, ambitious, uninterested in the technicalities of my world. Maybe that was what drew me to her back then, the way she lived, as if details didn't matter. But details matter. They're the difference between solvency and bankruptcy, between safety and ruin. And soon, they would be the difference between who walked away from this marriage whole and who didn't. By mid-morning, Laura's name lit up my phone. I ignored it. She called again, then again. 10 missed calls in an hour. A text followed. What the hell did you do? The money's gone. None of my cards work. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to the storage unit address she had sent. Inside were 2 cardboard boxes of my clothes and my old laptop. Everything else, my father's watch, our family photo albums, the guitar I'd had since high school, was gone. Seeing those empty shelves, something clicked inside me. This wasn't just about euros and bank transfers anymore. This was about someone trying to erase me from my own life, and I don't erase that easily. By the time I reached my office that Monday morning, I'd already received 12 calls and half a dozen frantic texts from Laura. I didn't respond to any of them. My assistant Claire looked up the moment I walked in. "Michael, I thought you were taking the day off. Your wife has called here 3 times already." She lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. She sounded desperate, said it was a mistake with the bank and she needed to talk to you. I set my briefcase down and shrugged out of my coat. "If she calls again, Claire, direct her to my attorney. Don't transfer her to me." Claire hesitated, then nodded. She had been with me for years. She knew I wasn't a man who said things lightly. I spent the next few hours reviewing case files, but my mind wasn't really on them. Every time the phone lit up with another missed call, the truth settled deeper into me. Laura had underestimated me. She thought she could run off with someone new, drain our savings, and I would crumble. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Around noon, the receptionist buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your wife is here. She's insistent." I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and rose from my desk. In the lobby, Laura stood in yoga pants and a designer jacket, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. When she saw me, she smiled a smile I'd seen 1,000 times when she wanted something. "Michael," she said brightly, loud enough for the staff to hear. "There's been a terrible mix-up with the bank. Can we talk privately?" I kept my voice even. "It's not a mix-up, Laura. You transferred money without authorization. The bank flagged it as fraud." Her smile cracked for the first time. "It was our joint account. I'm your wife." I leaned closer so no one else could hear. "You were my wife until you emptied our savings and told me you'd found someone better. That makes you my soon-to-be ex-wife, and that makes your transfer a textbook case of financial misconduct." For a moment the mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You can't do this to me. I've already signed a lease on a new place. I've made commitments with Troy." So there it was, confirmation of the man I had suspected. "Yes," I said quietly, "I know all about those commitments." Her face drained of color. "You're investigating me." "No," I replied. "I'm protecting myself from fraud, that's all." She straightened her shoulders, trying to recover her composure. "I'll fight this. I deserve half of everything we've built." I held her gaze. "Half of what you know about, maybe, but don't make the mistake of thinking that's all there is." She blinked, confused, trying to read whether I was bluffing. I left her standing there and walked back to my office. That afternoon, an email arrived from a lawyer I didn't recognize. It was from Laura's newly hired attorney, demanding full disclosure of my financial records and threatening to expose questionable accounting practices if I didn't comply. It was amateur intimidation and empty bluff. I forwarded the email to my attorney, Jessica Cole, with a single note: "Proceed as planned." Jessica replied within minutes, already in motion. By evening, my phone buzzed with messages from mutual friends. Laura had wasted no time rallying her side, painting me as vindictive and controlling the cold husband, freezing accounts to punish her. Not a single one of them asked where she'd been the past week, or who she'd been with, or why she had taken nearly 100,000 euros. No, people rarely want the messy truth. They prefer the version that fits their sympathies. I put the phone face down and drove to the community gym where I had trained for years. Not Laura's studio, not Troy's flashy fitness center, just the old place with peeling paint and squeaky floors. I benched until my arms trembled, then finished with a run that left my lungs burning. Anger dissolved into something sharper focus. When I returned to my hotel room that night, I found an email waiting from Jessica. The bank's fraud division had escalated the case. Because of my documentation and my contacts, they were moving quickly. Laura's transfer was frozen pending investigation, and the likelihood of recovery was high. In the meantime, every shared account was locked down. She was cut off. The next morning, Ethan called. "You ready for round 2?" he asked. "I've got some threads to pull." "Do it," I told him. "Start with Harmon Fitness LLC. I want everything public we can get. Loans, leases, credit reports. The works." Ethan chuckled darkly. "Legal channels only, right? Always," I said. "We're just connecting the dots faster than most people can." Within 3 hours, he sent me a dossier thick enough to sink a table leg. Troy Harmon, so Laura's someone better, was neck-deep in debt. His gym might have looked successful on Instagram, but behind the glossy posts was a business on life support. 3 maxed-out business cards, overdue equipment leases, and a commercial space he couldn't afford. Worse, Laura had already signed her name on a car loan with him 2 months earlier. "He's leveraged to the hilt," Ethan said when we spoke. "And guess who's propping him up? Your lovely wife." I closed my eyes, pinched the bridge of my nose. It wasn't surprising, but it still hit hard. She hadn't just walked out on me, she'd been funneling our money into his crumbling empire. Later that day, I sat at my desk with the dossier spread before me. It was more than betrayal. It was financial sabotage. 20 years of marriage reduced to numbers in the red, but numbers don't lie and they don't forgive. I stared at Troy's name until the letters blurred, then leaned back in my chair. If Laura thought she had walked into a fairy tale, she was about to wake up to a nightmare. 2 days later, Jessica called me into her office. Her tone was calm, measured, but there was a sharpness underneath it that told me she had uncovered something big. "Michael," she said, sliding a stack of papers across her desk, "we've found patterns in your joint account. Small withdrawals at first 200 here, 500 there, always at odd hours. But over the last year, the amounts ballooned. In total, nearly 70,000 has been siphoned off into accounts tied to an LLC registered under the name Harmon Fitness." My chest tightened, though it wasn't surprise anymore, it was confirmation. "So she's been funneling our money into his failing gym," I said flatly. Jessica nodded. "And it gets worse. Some of the transfers carry digital authorizations in your name. We're talking signatures, consents, approvals. Except they weren't you. We're looking at potential forgery." For a long moment, I just stared at the documents. Laura hadn't merely betrayed me, she had impersonated me, used my name as collateral for another man's mess. It was almost poetic. She had once claimed she didn't understand what I did for a living, that my world of numbers and discrepancies bored her. Yet here she was, caught in the very net of fraud she thought she could weave unnoticed. That evening I drove to Ethan's place. His basement looked more like a tech lab than a family home, wires and monitors everywhere. He was already at work, multiple screens glowing. "Take a look," he said, pointing to one. 4 months ago, Harmon applied for a small business loan, $200,000 backed by gym equipment. Pretty standard. But look at the co-signer. I leaned closer. There it was, Laura's signature flowing across the digital form. Ethan tapped another window. And here's the kicker. The loan terms specified joint responsibility with her spouse, meaning you. The words burned in my ears. "She used our marriage as leverage," I muttered. "She put my assets on the line without me even knowing." Ethan leaned back in his chair. And she didn't stop there. 3 credit cards, a new car lease, and the rental agreement for their commercial space. All co-signed, all tied to marital assets. I felt the room tilt, my pulse pounding. She hadn't just left me, she had shackled me to her new life with chains I hadn't agreed to wear. Outside, Ethan's kids were playing in the yard, their laughter spilling through the window. Innocent, unbothered, unaware of the wreckage adults create in the name of love and ambition. I pressed my hands against the desk, grounding myself. She has no idea what she's done, and neither does he. Ethan tilted his head. "So what's next? Burn them down?" I shook my head slowly. "Not burn, just let gravity do the work. They've built their empire on sand. All I have to do is let the tide in." The next morning I met Jessica again, this time armed with Ethan's findings. She read through the files with a steady expression, then looked up. "This is serious, Michael. Forging your name to secure loans using joint assets without consent, that's loan fraud. The banks will treat it as criminal." "Then let's move quickly," I told her. "I don't want them wriggling out before the walls close in." Jessica nodded. "We'll file for emergency asset protection today. That will freeze everything until the divorce is settled. The fraud alone will be enough to lock it all down." Walking out of her office, I felt a strange clarity. For weeks I'd been wading through shock, betrayal, anger. Now it was like stepping onto solid ground after a storm. The next step was obvious. I needed to look Troy in the eye. That afternoon I drove to his gym. From the outside it looked impressive, glass front, bold lettering, motivational quotes plastered across banners. Inside, young professionals in expensive workout gear lounged between half-hearted sets more focused on selfies than reps. The air smelled of protein shakes and fresh paint. Troy spotted me instantly. He was taller than I expected, all tan skin and capped teeth, the kind of man who believed charm could be currency. He strode over, a hand extended. "You must be Michael. Laura's told me so much about you." His grin was a salesman's grin, polished and hollow. I didn't take his hand. "We need to talk," I said. His smile flickered, but he gestured to his office, a glass-walled room visible to everyone but sealed for sound. He closed the door behind us. So he said lightly, "What can I do for you?" I placed a folder on his desk. This is everything connecting you and Laura to my financial life. Loans, leases, credit lines, all co-signed using marital assets you had no right to touch. He opened the folder, flipping through the documents with a growing frown. I don't understand. It's simple, I said. She used our marriage to guarantee your debts. But now that we're divorcing, those guarantees are invalid. The banks will be calling everything due. Soon. His tan face paled. He tried to recover, squaring his shoulders. These are legitimate agreements between me and Laura. You can't just, maybe they are legitimate between you two. But the banks approve them based on my income, my assets. Assets she no longer has any claim to. He closed the folder, slowly, fingers drumming on the desk. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. This isn't about you. I just thought you should know what's coming. He leaned forward, voice hardening. Laura told me you're wealthy, that this is just spite. Money's not an issue for you. Money's not the issue, I replied evenly. Trust is, and you'll learn soon enough what it costs to gamble with someone else's. I rose to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. When Laura moved out, she took some items that belonged to me, my father's watch, family photos, things money can't replace. I want them back. For the first time, Troy hesitated. The bravado cracked, replaced by something like unease. I'll see what I can do. I nodded once, then walked out. The next day, a courier delivered a plain box to my hotel. Inside were the missing photos, the watch, and other personal keepsakes. No note included. But the message was clear enough. Troy understood, and beneath all his charm and swagger, he was scared. By the time the weekend rolled around, Laura's messages had turned from anger to panic. Dozens of missed calls, frantic texts piling one after another. Michael, please call me back. This isn't what you think. We can fix it. Don't ruin everything out of spite. I ignored them all. Sunday night, she showed up at the hotel lobby. I spotted her through the glass doors, pacing, phone in hand, hair pulled into a messy bun that couldn't disguise the tension etched across her face. When I didn't come down, she finally left. The next morning, Jessica called. The bank has officially frozen all assets tied to your marriage. Any attempts to move money will be flagged immediately. How long until they notice the loan documents? I asked. Not long, she replied. Loan fraud isn't something institutions ignore. They'll call in the debts once the guarantees collapse. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off. Laura deserves better than you. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. I didn't need a signature to know it came from Troy. It was almost laughable, his attempt at intimidation. If anything, it confirmed just how desperate he was. That evening, Ethan and I sat in his kitchen with laptops open. He had pulled public data on Harmon Fitness's accounts, and the picture was even worse than before. Look at this, he said, pointing at the screen. The expansion last year, funded entirely by short-term loans. The equipment they bought is already collateral for 2 different lenders, and Laura's name shows up as co-signer on a $180,000 credit line. Again listed as married, again leveraging your assets. I rubbed my temples, feeling a familiar mix of fury and grim satisfaction. She has no idea the hole she's dug. Neither does he. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. So what's your play? Crush them legally or let the banks do it? Both, I said. Jessica will keep pushing on the fraud investigation. The banks will handle the rest. They're better executioners than I could ever be. The next day, Laura stormed into Jessica's office during a scheduled meeting. Jessica later recounted the scene to me with a wry smile. She marched in like she owned the place, Jessica said, demanding we unfreeze her cards, insisting the bank had misunderstood. I told her point blank this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was fraud. She didn't take it well. I could imagine the performance, Laura's voice pitching higher, the tears on cue, the righteous indignation she had perfected over the years. But charm doesn't sway numbers, and theatrics don't erase forged signatures. That evening, Jessica filed the petition for emergency asset protection. The motion was granted within hours. Every shared resource, every loan tied to our names, every line of credit frozen until the divorce settlement. Laura and Troy were officially trapped in a cage of their own making. The following morning, I drove past the gym again. From the outside, it looked the same: bright lights, glossy posters, carefully curated success. But I knew the truth now. Behind that facade, creditors were circling like vultures. By afternoon, Laura's tone had shifted again. She called from a blocked number, and this time I answered. Her voice was sharp, frantic. Michael? What have you done? The bank called in Troy's loans. They're seizing the equipment tomorrow. That's unfortunate, I said calmly. Don't play dumb with me. You're destroying him just to hurt me. I'm not doing anything to him. I'm protecting myself from fraud. You used our marriage to back his debts without my consent. That's illegal. For a moment's silence. Then her voice softened, slipping back into the register she had used so many times before. We can work this out. Just come home. We'll talk. 20 years together, and she still thought I could be swayed that easily. There's nothing to work out, I told her. The divorce will proceed. The fraud investigation will continue. And Troy will learn what it costs to build a business on someone else's back. She tried to protest, but I ended the call and blocked the number. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, Jessica called again. You're not going to believe this, she said. The banks found multiple forged signatures. Laura didn't just co-sign, she forged your name outright on several loan documents. They're escalating it to the district attorney. I let the words sink in. It was both shocking and entirely predictable. Laura had spent years insisting she wasn't interested in the details of my work. Yet here she was tangled in the very crime she once dismissed as boring paperwork. The irony was bitter enough to taste. What does this mean for me? I asked. It means you're in the clear. You're the victim of identity fraud. They're building a criminal case against her. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. She had wanted to erase me, to discard me like old furniture. Instead, she had written me into every one of her mistakes, and the paper trail was undeniable. Later that night, Ethan dropped by the hotel with takeout. We sat at the small table, cartons of noodles spread between us. You know, he said, between bites you could push harder. With these charges you could bury her and him both. I shook my head. There's no need. They've buried themselves. I don't need revenge. I just need freedom. Ethan studied me for a moment, then raised his beer. To freedom. I clinked my glass against his. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the word meant something. The repossession trucks showed up on a Thursday morning. I knew because Ethan texted me a photo, 2 flatbeds parked outside Harmon Fitness men in uniforms wheeling out treadmills and racks of weights, while confused gym members filmed on their phones. Troy was there too, pacing in front of the glass doors, waving his arms in protest while a man in a suit pointed at documents. It was the kind of scene that spreads online like wildfire, the collapse of a carefully staged empire caught in real time. By the afternoon, the video was already circulating on social media with captions like, "Fitness King loses his throne and so much for hustle culture." I watched it once, then closed my laptop. There was nothing more I needed to see. That evening, a plain box arrived at the hotel again. This one contained more of my things, old photo albums, a leather journal, the guitar I thought was gone forever. No note included, just like before. It was obvious Troy had decided to cut his losses quietly, returning the items he had no use for. It struck me that in some twisted way, he understood what Laura never had, that some things couldn't be replaced, and messing with them crossed a line. The next morning, Laura appeared at my office again. Claire buzzed me nervously, and I almost told her to send Laura away. But something in me wanted to see her face now that the walls were closing in. She was dressed to perfection as always, tailored blazer heels clicking on the tile, but the strain was visible. Her smile was brittle, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "Michael," she began, voice carefully modulated, "we don't have to do this. We can still settle this between us." I folded my hands on the desk. "We're already settling it, Laura. Through the courts." Her composure cracked. "They're seizing everything. Troy's business, our accounts, it's all unraveling. You're just standing by and letting it happen." "I'm not letting it happen," I corrected. "I set safeguards in place to protect myself years ago. What's happening now is the consequence of your choices. You made them. You live with them." She flinched at that, then leaned forward, dropping her voice. "You always acted like you were so calm, so in control. I thought you'd just let me go and move on. I never thought you'd fight back like this." I felt a strange calm settle over me. That was my mistake. I let you believe I was passive, that I'd never push back, but everyone has a breaking point. She searched my face for some crack, some softness she could slip through. Finding none, she straightened, her voice icy. "I'll find another lawyer. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. Do what you need to," I said. "The banks aren't waiting. They'll move faster than any lawyer can." She stood abruptly, grabbed her bag, and left without another word. The silence she left behind felt heavier than the argument itself. That night, Jessica called with an update. The emergency protection order is holding. The banks have confirmed the repossessions, and they're filing claims against Laura for fraud. The district attorney is reviewing the forged documents. This is no longer just a divorce, it's a criminal matter. I stared out the hotel window at the lights of the city. For the first time, I realized the full weight of what was happening. Laura hadn't just gambled with our marriage, she had gambled with the law, and now she was about to lose everything. 2 days later, Troy tried to call me directly. When I didn't answer, he sent an email, rambling, defensive, laced with desperation. He claimed Laura had told him I was loaded and that she had promised my support. He said none of this was his fault, that he had been misled just like me. He begged me to convince the bank not to crush him. I didn't reply. His downfall wasn't my responsibility. The banks would finish what Laura had started. Over the weekend, Ethan and I met for a drink at a quiet bar downtown. He slid a beer across to me and smirked. "So your ex's knight in shining spandex turned out to be made of cardboard." I chuckled despite myself. Cardboard burns faster than steel. Ethan leaned in, his tone serious. "You know, you could have taken this further. Pressed charges for theft, pushed for restitution, even gone after her studio. You'd win." I shook my head. What would be the point? I don't want her business, her debts, or her chaos. I just want out. Ethan raised his glass. "Then you're already winning." A week later, another box arrived. This one had my father's pocket knife, some books, and a set of cufflinks I hadn't seen in years. Again, no note. I wondered if it was Laura this time trying to appease me, or if Troy was simply cleaning house. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that piece by piece the fragments of my life were returning to me, stripped of the illusions that had smothered them. Late that night, as I set the cufflinks on the dresser, I realized something. I no longer felt anger. Not at Laura, not even at Troy, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the storm has ripped everything away and you can finally see what was underneath. And what I saw was simple. I wasn't broken. I wasn't erased. I was still here, and I was free to decide what came next. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a long, sterile conference room, the kind with bland art on the walls and fluorescent lights humming above. Jessica sat beside me, calm as ever, her leather folder neatly stacked with documents. Across from us, Laura walked in with her new attorney. She was dressed impeccably, of course, cream blouse, navy blazer, hair styled into loose waves, but the strain was etched into her face. The designer makeup couldn't hide the fact that she hadn't been sleeping. Her attorney, a sharp-faced man named Grant, opened with a rehearsed tone. "My client is willing to be reasonable regarding division of assets despite the aggressive tactics pursued thus far." Jessica gave a polite smile, the kind that barely touched her lips. "That's good to hear, Mr. Fulton, because there's been a development you'll want to review." She slid a document across the table. Grant picked it up, scanning quickly, his face drained of color. Laura leaned over to read, her perfectly painted nails tightening on the paper. "What is this?" she demanded, voice sharp. Jessica answered evenly. "The bank has completed its fraud investigation. They've determined your client forged Michael's signature on multiple loan documents using marital assets without his knowledge. The matter has already been referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." The room went silent. I watched Laura's face pale, the realization crashing down on her. She turned toward me, eyes wide, disbelief mingled with desperation. "Michael, you can't let them do this. You wouldn't let me go to prison." I met her gaze, steady and cold. "I didn't file the charges, Laura. The bank did. Actions have consequences." Grant cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We'll need time to review this." Jessica's smile never wavered. "Of course, but you should also know that Michael is prepared to offer a settlement. If your client agrees today, he's willing to provide a statement to the bank that could mitigate the criminal implications." Laura's head snapped toward me, her expression a mix of shock and fury. "A settlement? After everything, you're still trying to control me?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm giving you a choice. You keep your studio, your car, your personal belongings, but you get no alimony and you assume responsibility for every debt you incurred in my name. That's the deal." She shook her head violently, tears brimming. "That's impossible. I can't carry all that." Jessica spoke smoothly, cutting through her panic. "Then your alternative is facing criminal charges, forgery, fraud, misrepresentation. The DA won't go easy." Laura's hands trembled on the table. For years she had wielded charm like a weapon, bending people to her will. But charm couldn't erase signatures or balance ledgers. She glanced at Grant, who leaned close and whispered something into her ear. She shook her head at first vehemently, but then her shoulders sagged, her defiance collapsing. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent light above us. Finally, Laura whispered, "Fine, I'll sign." Jessica slid the papers toward her, and with shaky hands, Laura scrawled her name on the agreement. As she set the pen down, she looked up at me, eyes wet, voice trembling. "I never thought you'd fight back like this. You always just went along with everything." I felt nothing but clarity. "That was my choice, Laura, just like this was yours." I stood gathering my things. Jessica followed her expression, professional, controlled. As we walked out of the conference room, I didn't look back. Later that evening, Jessica called to confirm the agreement had been filed. "It's done," she said. "You're officially free of her debts and obligations. The banks will handle the rest with Troy. As far as you're concerned, it's over." I thanked her and hung up. Sitting in my hotel room, I felt an unexpected stillness settle over me. For months, everything had been chaos, anger, betrayal, frantic moves to protect myself. Now there was only quiet. Not victory, not vindication, just freedom. The following day, word spread quickly among mutual friends. Some reached out in hushed tones, shocked at how things had turned. A few even tried to defend Laura, clinging to the narrative she had fed them. I didn't waste time correcting them. People see what they want to see. I had no interest in rewriting their stories. Mine was enough. That weekend, I walked past Harmon Fitness one last time. The windows were covered in brown paper, a sign taped to the door, "Closed for reorganization." It was a polite euphemism for collapse. Online, Troy's social media had gone dark. No more flashy posts, no more motivational quotes, just silence. Laura's accounts, meanwhile, had shifted overnight. Gone were the yoga retreats and inspirational captions. In their place were vague affirmations about new beginnings and moving forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was still performing, still trying to spin a narrative for strangers. But behind the curated facade was a life in ruins, and she knew it. As for me, I realized I no longer cared. A month after the settlement, I packed up the last of my things from the hotel and moved into a small house near downtown Betrayal. Nothing fancy, just a 2-story craftsman with peeling paint, a yard that needed mowing, and creaky wooden floors that told stories of their own. It wasn't the polished townhouse Laura had insisted on with the marble counters and imported fixtures. This place had character, and more importantly, it was mine. No shared accounts, no hidden strings, no illusions. Just 4 walls and the promise of a new start. On the first Saturday, Ethan came over to help me replace the kitchen cabinets. We worked in companionable silence, measuring, sawing, and drilling, the smell of fresh wood mixing with the faint aroma of coffee. At one point, he looked up and asked, "Heard anything from her?" I shook my head. Not a word. And I don't expect to. He smirked. "You know, you could have taken her for everything. With the fraud charges, she would have been buried." I set the drill down and leaned against the counter, and what would that have given me? More money, more bitterness. "She's no longer my problem, Ethan. That's worth more than anything." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. We went back to work, the steady rhythm of tools filling the space. Later that evening, after Ethan left, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon. The neighborhood was quiet, kids playing down the block, the occasional bark of a dog, different from the upscale world Laura had craved, but real in a way that life had never been with her. I thought about the last 20 years, how I had ignored the warning signs, how I had let someone else define my worth, how I had convinced myself that passivity was peace. But the truth was, I had been complicit in my own erasure. I'd noticed the discrepancies, the absences, the lies. I'd chosen not to act, until the day came when I couldn't ignore them anymore. Freedom didn't feel like triumph. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like standing at the edge of a lake in Vermont, the kind I used to visit with my father, and breathing air that was finally clean. A week later, I called my office and told Claire I was taking 2 weeks off. No plans, no schedule. I threw a duffel bag into my truck, locked the house, and headed north. The highway stretched ahead, an open road that didn't demand explanations. I stopped where I wanted, small diners, gas stations with faded signs, quiet motels with neon lights flickering at dusk. At night, I'd sit under unfamiliar skies, stars scattered above me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of an invisible ledger keeping score of every disappointment, every resentment. I was just a man moving forward. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Laura had relocated to Colorado. Her social media was filled with mountain views and captions about healing and second chances. Troy, meanwhile, had vanished from Boston entirely. Word was his gym had been sold off to a national chain, and he'd resurfaced in Miami trying to rebuild his brand. Neither of them mentioned what had happened, of course. People rarely advertise their failures, but I didn't need their updates. Their paths no longer crossed with mine, and I intended to keep it that way. One evening, as I sat by a lake in New Hampshire with a fishing rod in hand, I thought about my father. He had always warned me, "Son, make sure the person beside you values the work behind the money. Otherwise, it's just numbers to them." I had brushed him off at the time too, caught up in Laura's energy and charm. Now his words echoed in me with a clarity I hadn't appreciated before. He hadn't been telling me to be stingy or paranoid. He had been telling me to protect the parts of myself that mattered, to make sure my worth wasn't reduced to a bank balance. I let the line sink into the water, the ripples spreading out, and realized that in some twisted way, I owed Laura gratitude. She had forced me to face truths I'd been avoiding for years. She had stripped away the illusions, leaving me with nothing but myself. And that turned out to be enough. When I finally drove back to Boston, the house felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. The walls didn't echo with absence. They resonated with possibility. I unpacked slowly, filling the shelves with books, hanging photos of my parents and brother, setting my father's watch in a place of honor. Little by little, I built a home that reflected me, not us. Some evenings I still felt the sting of betrayal. That's the thing about wounds, they don't disappear overnight. But pain has a way of becoming a teacher, and every time it surfaced, I reminded myself of the lesson: I would never again ignore the signs. I would never again let someone else erase me in the name of love. I would value myself even if no one else did. And I would never apologize for fighting to protect what was mine. Standing in that house, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt free. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters.